It's time for another episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show, a podcast where I connect you with thought leaders from across the globe, digging into some of my favorite topics like personal development, marketing, spirituality, and pretty much any other shiny object that happens to catch my attention. Today, my special guest is my friend Jennifer Dukes Lee, and we're going to be discussing her new book, Growing Slow: Lessons on Unhurrying Your Heart from an Accidental Farm Girl. Jennifer, it is always a joy to speak with you. Welcome to the show.
This is fun. Welcome to my farm.
Yes, and it's funny for people I've known for whether it's in our case like 3-4 years or many years. It's always fun the first time I get to have somebody on my podcast who I've known forever. It seems it always makes it a fun conversation. So you and I first met when I still worked at Baker Publishing Group, and you were coming on as somebody who was an accomplished author already in the Christian publishing space, but then you became an acquisitions editor, so you get to put on a new hat, so to speak. I'm curious to hear, for you, how did that expand your understanding or perspective on the publishing space? Because it's one thing to be an author on that side of the glass. It's another thing to jump to the other side of the glass and be working inside the bubble, so to speak.
Right. And to see how the sausage is made. I was
Exactly.
really worried, actually. Is this going to make me really jaded? But what I have found is, I think the Baker Publishing Group in particular, and the people that I work with are just really good people, the kind of people that I'd like to have over for a steak on a Saturday night. So that's been really encouraging to me. And the prayerful way in which books are put together. I think it's actually made me a better author as well, because I understand more about what's called felt need and that thing, that pain point that a reader has. And I can speak into that in a more direct and meaningful way. So I think that's actually made me a better author. And I think that being an author has made me a better editor over time, because I know all of the self-doubting that an author goes through and what it's like to show up not only to the page when you're writing, but also the demand to churn out content for social media. And I think it's just it's a nice blend of experience for me that I hope will continue to just improve my ability to be an effective communicator.
Well, that was one of the things I was excited about when you came onto the team, is that you could just bring a different perspective as you're working with authors. It's always nice to work with somebody who you feel like understands you. And I would imagine most of the authors that you're acquiring feel very understood from you, because you're just that kind of a person, very friendly. And from my perspective, you seem very easy to get along with. So, and I want to touch on one thing you said. Is kind of that idea of sort of, I use the phrase writer's remorse, where you always, if you were able to rewrite a book today, you would say it differently, or you have kind of a fuller revelation or understanding of what you experienced because you're that much further down the journey. So if you're an aspiring author, just know that writer's remorse is a thing. It won't ever go away. You would always do it differently or better, because the reality is, as we grow and as we change, we could always do a better job if we were to do something tomorrow or the next week or the next month, whenever that might be. And so, a book is kind of a snapshot of in time where we were and what we understood, how we were on the journey with God. So if you have writer's remorse, it's okay. We won't judge you. It's just a normal part of the process. Talk to us about getting into that mindset of growing slow and how that changed the way you live your life. I'm assuming that there was also a time when you weren't growing slow and you were kind of going at a different pace.
Right. So the book that I could have more naturally written based on my default systems is Growing Fast, because that's the way that I've operated as an Enneagram 3 high capacity achieving sort of person. And really, I can think back into even my teen years where that was my mode. And it was actually a pretty effective way to live for a while in terms of accomplishing what I wanted to accomplish in the news business. I was a news reporter before I was a book author. And if a boss asked me to work on a Sunday or to work overtime, the answer was almost always going to be yes. And I didn't really notice until looking in the rearview mirror of my life what a toll it was taking on relationships, on my health, on my marriage, um, on my ability to rest, on my faith. Really, every area was being impacted over time. And as I got older, my body was no longer able to keep the pace of my willingness to work really hard. And my husband was exactly the same way. And together we made a decision to move back to the farm about 15 years ago. And I remember this moment when Scott and I were standing on the edge of a field, and we were each holding one of our small children, and a photographer from the Des Moines Register came to take a picture of us for a farewell essay that I was writing for the Des Moines Register. And I was looking at this photographer and thinking about how all of my colleagues had been telling us, you are making a really bad choice. You are throwing away your potential. You're throwing away your education. You were on the cusp of something really great. And now you're throwing it all away. And I remember looking at that photographer thinking, what if they're right? We had made this growing slow decision clear back then, but I was thinking, what if they're right? And if I could go back, I would start celebrating on that day, because it took me a while to ask a different kind of question. And that is, what if they're wrong? Because they weren't living that crazy pace that we were living. We were living it, and it was hurting us. And, it's just because we live on a farm doesn't mean that we aren't tempted to rush and want to hurry things along and reach certain milestones in life. But living on the farm has definitely taught us through seasons and through nature and through God's work in our fields what it means to grow slow. So I'm still in process of learning how to grow slow. And God's always teaching me something new. Right now, we're learning it very literally because we're in a season of drought on our farm. And, that's perfect metaphor for how a lot of us feel with our growth too. And it doesn't feel all lush and green. So constantly learning new things about the growing slow life.
Well, and the reality is we're in a culture that really worships the hustle and the grind and, 10xing everything. And that's great when you're in your 20s and maybe into your early to mid 30s. You can steal from father time a lot and really steal from additional resources in your body for a time. But there's a point where that catches up to you and it becomes impossible. And so the earlier we can learn to embrace this growing slow mentality, the better, because at the end of the day, it can be kind of that growing fast. It sounds exciting and all that, but eventually we end up coming up short physically, mentally, emotionally. And the reality, I've done over 900 interviews for the podcast at this point, and for all the people I've met who would be like, "Oh, he's an overnight success. She's an overnight success." When you dig into their backstory, the average overnight success takes 10 to 15 years, and so while you may have not known about that person until they suddenly peaked or they seem to just be on the scene everywhere, it was a long journey to get there. So even if you're trying to grow fast, there's, it's actually a slow process. That fast growth is 10 to 15 years. So have some resources left in yourself to be able to move in that latter part of the journey. One of the things I said a lot about 2020 is it was both a gift and kind of a curse at the same time, if you will. I've talked a lot in other episodes about the gift to the church in some ways for the things that made us wrestle with. And, I would say we got compressed and sometimes Jesus came out and sometimes other junk came out. But in the terms of being forced to grow slow and just really go slow and really lose all of our markers and moorings. That was one of the fascinating parts of last year. How can we perhaps look at 2020 as a gift where we were forced to kind of get off the train and slow down?
Right. I think that a lot of us have at times wondered, what would it look like if the world would shut down and I didn't have all these things? I mean, it was previously inconceivable. And all of a sudden it happened. People in Manhattan were saying, oh, it's so weird. Like during COVID, the birds are chirping so much more loudly. Well, they weren't chirping more loudly and there weren't actually more birds. There just wasn't any interfering noise. And we were all slowing down and paying attention to our world in a different way. I know even here on the farm, we took walks every single day. We made a commitment to stand under a big wide open sky every day, rain or shine. And I saw parts of my neighborhood that I'd never even encountered before because of slow walks along the country roads. And our family, I always just kind of like to order my life around meals and food anyway, but it became even more so that way. Food became a time of being entertained in our family, and we took turns making more elaborate meals. And I know that this was true for people everywhere because you couldn't even find yeast on the grocery store shelves because people were baking bread, which, just a few months earlier, like bread is a a banned food for so many people. You go onto Amazon and try to find games or puzzles, and you couldn't find them. They were in as about a short of supply as toilet paper. And I obviously don't want to go back, and none of us want to go back to a time when we had to count how many toilet paper rolls we had, or washing our groceries. I don't know if you did that. That was so ridiculous. But we're like washing our groceries. But there were some blessings that came out of it. We had an opportunity to look at ourselves, which was kind of scary to see what we looked like and what our coping mechanisms were when we had whited out calendars. So, because one of my coping mechanisms is productivity, when that was taken away, it really revealed that crutch for me of productivity, but taught me some new things about myself. And so, I've really been encouraging people as they move forward in a post pandemic world to look back on those early weeks when you had that whited out calendar and what changed for you. I imagine it was meals. I imagine it was family time. I imagine it was like our family was more creative in thinking about how do I bless and be generous to my neighbor in a situation like this. We're all doing drive-by birthday parties and figuring out how to get groceries to our elderly neighbors and those sorts of things. I want to hold on to that as moving forward into 2021 and beyond. I want to have that heart of what does it look like to be generous and think about others in ways that I hadn't before.
Yeah, oddly, throughout last year, we seemed to have the margin and the brain space to see people again, and we had to be creative with being intentional. And so, if that's one of the things we hold on to on the other side of the pandemic, God help us. That'd be wonderful if we can stay in that place where we actually see people again and be intentional about pouring into people, even if it sometimes was odd with the drive-by birthday parties and things
Right.
that we never thought we'd do that before. But we still got to bless people. We still got to love people. I want to talk about a functional component of your book, and that is the journaling component. Sometimes in publishing, we add questions and journaling components to add a few more pages into a book just to beef it up a little bit more. In your case, I think it was a little bit more intentional for the journey you want to take your readers on. I love that you've got three R's: remember, reflect, return. Give me an alliteration, and I'm just a happy, happy boy. So, what's the purpose of that framework? And as readers are working their way through the book, how is that an important component of the journey? Because I feel like there's one or two people in the world: the people who refuse to do any exercises or questions or journaling prompts at the end of a chapter, and then there's the other half who religiously do them all. Why is it important?
Yeah, so you're right. It wasn't an add on to add pages. It was definitely intentional. This has been a daily practice of mine for as long as I can remember, but I didn't even know it was a daily practice. It was just something that I did. And I thought it would be helpful to put in the book because it is in and of itself a slowing down practice. When you take the time to remember, reflect on that, and return, and I'll explain each one of those. It has an effect of just kind of pausing and looking back before we look forward and jump ahead into the day. And so when we remember, remembering is it could be a Bible verse, it could be a song lyric from your favorite 80s tune, it can be something your grandma told you, it can be a memory with your child. It doesn't matter, but just remembering something that's important to you that happened over the day or over the last week. And then when you reflect on it, you ask the Holy Spirit to speak into you about what is God saying to me through that? What is important about that? And I provide prompts for the chapters, so you don't have to come up with your own. But I guide people through that. And then when you return, you are returning to the land that is your life. My land is farmland in Iowa. Your land might be somewhere very different, but returning to the land that is your life, where your feet hit the ground every day, and putting that into practice in your life. So it could be a simple principle like slow progress is still progress. And when I remember that, like when I'm at the gym and it seems like I'm not making progress with some of my physical goals that I want to have, then I remember and return to the land that is my life and tell myself, slow progress is still progress. Slow growth is still growth. And so those principles become guiding principles for life and really change how I operate day in and day out in big things and also little things like the gym.
I'm curious to hear for you, Jennifer. Like, what's the weirdest thing that fascinates people about your life on the farm? Because I grew up in rural Minnesota, and my grandfather in his retirement was a veterinarian, so I got to go see all kinds of crazy farms as I was growing up as a kid. But I think for the average person, most of us have no connection to farm life. We have no clue, no context. I was amazed. I've been to a few zoos where they have kind of a farmland area where you can watch somebody milk a cow or something else, which me, I'm like, yep, I've seen that a million times. And then people are just like mind blown. They've never seen that. So I'm just curious for life on the farm, what are some of the strangest questions people actually ask you?
Well, a lot of people think that the corn in the fields is like sweet corn that you eat as a human, and it's not. It's used for all different kinds of things like ethanol and feed for animals. A lot of people also think that most farms are kind of like old McDonald had a farm. And it's understandable because there's a lot of hobby farms that have a few chickens and a couple of cows and just little bits of these things, but most farms these days are more specialized. And so our farm is 700 acres of corn and soybeans that we rotate the crops every year because it's good for the soil. And we also have about 1,000 pigs. And we don't have chickens or um, any other kinds of animals. I mean, we could, but our food production business here is about pork and it's about soybeans and corn. And it's a fifth generation farm, which I think is also very fascinating for people. At the state fair this year, we will be getting recognition as a heritage farm, meaning that we have been around for 150 years. And that's a long time. And it also is a lot of pressure on farmers because there is this sort of feeling that I've got to keep this going because it's been going in the family for so long. And so during hard years on a farm, it feels like a sort of generational pressure. And like my grandpa was able to keep this going, and my great grandparents were able to keep this going, and my great great grandparents were able to keep this going. And so that it leads to another surprising thing about life on the farm is that there are high levels of anxiety and depression among farmers. And during really difficult years, like in the farm crisis of the 80s, there were very high rates of suicide among farmers. And so it seems like this idyllic sort of Hallmark Channel life, when in reality it is difficult and it's hard, but it is an act of faith to farm. Scott says all the time, my husband Scott, I learn as much about God on the seat of a tractor as I do in a pew at church.
Yes, there is something about being on your land, being alone, having time to talk to God and think. Even in the midst of long hours of busy work in that kind of a context, the amount of headspace we can have with God is pretty amazing. And I feel like there is something that really connects us really even back to the Garden of Eden, if you will, working our land and just being on the journey with God in that way. There's something very special about that. Talk to us about the importance of putting down deep roots. I feel like some of us learned new rhythms and patterns and habits last year as we figured out how to cope and shift and change throughout the ups and downs of 2020. In terms of maybe continuing those good habits and getting those roots deeper, how do we be intentional doing that every single day?
Oh, that's such a good question. And may I also push pause because I heard you say roots, but then you kind
Roots.
of said roots.
Well, I don't see. I'm from Minnesota, so I probably don't say things like people do down here in South Carolina now or in Iowa. I'm
No,
super messed up.
I'm a roots girl, and so I get stopped. I get paused on all of these podcasts. Like, what did you just say? Roots. I say it like soot, and then
Yep.
most people say it like boots, roots. So
Yeah.
I just feel in a kindred space right now. It just makes me so
See,
happy.
I would say it one way how I probably learned it growing up, and then my wife, who's a big grammar girl, obsessively corrects all these words I learned how to say growing up in rural Minnesota. So it's a point of contention in our marriage. Yet we continue on.
All right. Well, whether you say roots or roots, the importance of deep rooted growth cannot be over exaggerated. We see it on the farm, especially in a season like this when we're in a drought. The reason that that plant can continue to grow and flourish to a point is because those roots have gone down deep in search of water to find that water that's way down. And then also during seasons of high winds, which we often get out here on the plains of Iowa, a deep rooted corn stalk that it can be bent over like this, and you think there's no way we're going to yield anything off of that plant. But we come harvest time, we actually can. And that is because the roots have held that plant strong. And the same is true for people. The same is true for relationships. Same is true for businesses. Things that don't put down strong roots are going to fall over in storms in times of drought. So like I'm married, and we're constantly putting down deep roots in our marriage, and we've been married for 25 years. And I look at my parents who are in their 80s and they've been married 62 years, and I see how deep rooted growth has made their relationship sustainable. And I think that, this grow fast and go big or go home mentality puts the rewards fast growth, but fast growth cannot put down deep roots. And so you might, go viral with an Instagram post or something like that, which is really wonderful, I guess. But in time, that's not what is going to sustain you in your business or your ministry or what have you.
And that is always the challenge, I work with authors to promote things for a living. You promote your own stuff. You're working with your authors to help them do promotion. And we all do long for that viral video or Instagram post that blows up. And, often it's a flash in the pan and it's fleeting. And you're kind of living by what other people think about you, or how many times they click like and share and all the things. And so trying to draft off of those successes, while it's fun in the moment, it's a mountaintop time, and eventually it will end, and it's not going to last forever. So fine to keep pursuing those things. We all got to do what we got to do to get the word out, but we can't really live off of those things, because a lot of times that will leave us sad, because it comes up short in the end. Let's talk a little bit about winter seasons. I think we talked about this a little bit before we got into the interview. We have amazing mountaintop experiences. We have times in the valley as well, and kind of in those winter cold kind of crazy seasons. We can often feel like God's forsaken us. He's just not there. A lot of times I feel like it has to do with us distancing ourselves from God in those seasons. But talk to us about how we really need to be in a position where we can embrace those winter seasons, and just know that God is working even at those times when it just seems like he's not even around.
I did not want to write the winter chapters of Growing Slow.
No, nobody wants to write the winter chapter. But
So
I'm glad you didn't use it in the title, because that would be a horrible felt need.
right. And so I have this book is separated into 4 seasons, and the book ends in the winter season. And so I turned my manuscript in to my agent and my editor, and I said, people don't want to dwell in these winter seasons, so I'm just going to write a couple chapters. I don't have anything more to say about winter. Well, as you can imagine, they both came back and said, you have more to say and you need to say more. And it turns out then that my favorite chapter of the entire book is chapter 17, which is one of the winter chapters. And the essence of it is this, and I think this is vital for us as we go through any kind of growing season or a season that seems dormant. The thing about winter is it can look very bleak and dreary and unproductive out in the land. And it can seem as if nothing is happening. But the truth of the matter is there is a lot happening in winter. There is all kinds of things happening underneath the surface that we cannot see. And even the snow that falls around here, it's called poor man's fertilizer because it has natural nitrogen in it. And so that in itself, the snow in itself brings life and vitality to the land. One of the most remarkable parts about winter is that when the freeze thaw cycle happens, just moving into spring, it pushes forth rocks to the surface. So rocks that weren't there in July are suddenly there in March. And we have to go out and pick those rocks up and discard them, because if we leave them in the field, they will hurt the equipment. And so last year, when I was writing that chapter, Scott sent me a picture. He's like, Jennifer, you've got to see this rock. It was the size of a living room recliner. It was absolutely huge. Excuse me. It was absolutely huge. And he had to use a skid loader to dig that rock out. And the same is true for us. Winter seasons allow burdens that are like stones to emerge from the soil of our heart. And those are things that we have carried around in us for a very long time. And winter seasons, we allow God to pick up those rocks and discard them. But we must go through multiple winter seasons, because there's always more rocks that need to emerge. There's always more that can happen in a winter season. And if 1/4 of a growing season on a farm is winter, then probably the same needs to happen for us as human beings. If farms need winter, so do people.
Well, it's almost time for us to wrap up, so I have to move into my favorite wrap up question, which is when readers get to the last page of the book, what's that big takeaway? How do you hope you've impacted them? If they get one thing from the book, what is it?
That it's okay to grow slow. It takes time to grow good things. And the most important things in life actually take the longest to grow. So just to go nice and easy. And as I like to tell my readers and my friends, stop living a ready, set, go life and live a ready, set, slow life.
Yeah, it's not we all have seasons where we have to do the big push and the all nighter and the things. It's just part of life. It comes up,
Right.
but it's more about consistency in putting in all the small things every day that over time, that's what makes the difference. That's what really brings so many of the things that we long to achieve, those things that we would consider markers of success along the journey as we look back. I want to give you a chance to mention your Growing Slow Bible study. Tell us about that. How does that connect to the book?
Right. So it's a 6-session Bible study, and the videos are free. They weren't free to create, but I'm offering them free to readers. And as a longtime Bible study teacher in my community, I know how important it is to have a visual component. And so we recorded those through the course of an entire year here on the farm. And so it's lessons from the land. And there are so many biblical farming lessons, so we were able to incorporate a lot of what Jesus taught using farming as a metaphor for life. So I'm really excited about the Bible study workbook as well as the free videos.
And Jennifer, for the listeners, the viewers who'd like to connect with you, find out more about your ministry, your books, all the things, where do we discover you on the web?
So I'm pretty much Jennifer Dukesley everywhere: Facebook, Instagram. That's the name of my website. And if you want to know in particular about Growing Slow, you can go to growingslowbook.com.
And like we do with every episode, we'll have links in the show notes to places you can connect with Jennifer and places you can pick up your very own copy of her new book as well. It's time to bring this episode of the Shaun Tabatt Show to a close. Many thanks for being a part of my conversation with Jennifer Dukesley. Once again, her book today was Growing Slow, Lessons on Unhurrying Your Heart from an Accidental Farm Girl. A great place to start if you want to find out more is Jennifer's website. You can find that over at jenniferdukesley.com. And Jennifer, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing with us today. It's been an honor. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show. And you're going to have to say something. They can't see you unless you say goodbye.
It's been a joy. Thank you, Shaun.